Morning, everyone. So our first session for today is collaboration, digitization, and sustainability. And I think it's going to be really good. We've got 4 talks lined up. The first of which is Emma Murphy from the National Museum of Ireland. And I should say I am Emer Ash from the National Museum of Ireland. But talking this morning is Emma Murphy, National Museum of Ireland, speaking on ways to skin a large cat, re-establishing relationships between live and dead collections. Thank you. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Oh, okay. Okay, screen 2. That one. That one. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for getting up relatively early and coming in to listen to this talk. As Emer said, I am Emma Murphy. I am a fairly recent addition to the Natural History Division in the National Museum of Ireland Natural History. I've been there in this role in the last 18 months. I'm curator of terrestrial zoology. Yes, there we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something I've been working on almost since I started, which is building a relationship with a local zoo, kind of re-establishing a relationship that did exist historically, but has kind of fallen by the wayside in recent decades. So we'll all be familiar with this kind of historic route for specimens. Often animals are or were captured in the wild. They may have been collected or killed in the wild, or they, in many cases, were transported live back to zoological gardens and kept alive as long as the early days of animal husbandry would allow before going to the zoo. Or sorry, before going to a teaching lab. So when they died in the zoo, they'd often go to comparative anatomy teaching labs in medical colleges, or zoology courses, veterinary courses, things like that. And then after that, a lot of them eventually made their way to our collections, and I'm sure many of your collections are the same. This is an example of an entry in our register which shows an animal coming in from the Royal Zoological Society of Ireland. So we have a young orangutan. This was accessioned in 1899. The collection locality is question mark. So they weren't sure whether it was born in the zoo or was transported there. We sent it to Roland Ward in England to be stuffed. The brain was sent to Professor Cunningham, who was Professor of Anatomy and TCD at the time, Trinity College Dublin. The skull was put into our own sandpit in the good old days when we had our own sandpit. And afterwards, it was put into a case with a pre-existing adult male orangutan, which had been bought from Jared. To give you a look at what we have in our collections from zoos in Ireland, we have 348 things from the Royal Zoological Society of Ireland, or the Zoological Society of Ireland as they became known in the 1990s. We have 8 things that came from Dublin Zoo, which is like a more specific term for the Royal Zoological Society of Ireland. Now the Dublin Zoo used to be the extent of the Royal Zoological Society, but now there are other zoos in Ireland that are members of that. What happens now? Well, they don't come from the wild, thank God. We don't do that anymore, unless, there's a really rare case where there's a conservation need to collect the last members of a breeding population. For the most part, animals are not captured in the wild, put into captivity. But from the zoo, where do they go? Well, they don't really go to teaching labs in Ireland anymore. Comparative anatomy isn't really taught in medical schools in the way that it was. Zoology courses, even, I think I must be the last person in Trinity who did any dissections of comparative anatomy before they don't bother with the labs anymore. So much is available online. And yeah, they certainly don't come to us in the museum because we don't get very many offers of things. So the question was, where do they go? What prompted me to ask this question was this lovely lad, Saibu, who was an adult male orangutan who lived for many decades in Dublin Zoo. Much loved by the public. I did work in the zoo for a year after my master's, yeah, he was a quite impressive guy, full of personality. He passed away on the 29th of February 2024, or the news broke at least that he had passed away on that date. And it was like widely reported in the Irish media, picked up by many different outlets, because the public were so fond of him, basically. And like many of us in this room, I hope you won't think me heartless to think that the first thing I thought was, oh, I wonder, can I have him? and, and, so I asked the question. I asked my colleagues, because as I said, I'm not in this particular role very long. I said, what happens? Where do they go? And the reason I did this is because this is our adult male orangutan. Um, he is the one we purchased from Gerard pre-1899. I don't have the exact date actually for him, but you can see that the taxidermist, with the best will in the world, like many of us, we have specimens that they said, well, there's more skin, we must put more stuffing in there. So they have no facial disc whatsoever. So he's not very accurate either, aside from the fact that he's old. He's not the most zoologically correct depiction of a male orangutan. So possible destinations for Saibu that people said to me. Well, he's probably going to the zoo's own preserved collection, because Dublin Zoo does have a really fantastic kind of mini museum in there, and they historically, and even up until maybe 10 years ago, used to preserve a lot of their animals in-house. And I knew they weren't really doing that very often anymore, but it was an option. They could have been doing that. Was he going to the vet cottage collection? So all animals that die in Dublin Zoo have to be necropsied. So they find out basically the cause of death and why they weren't well. And basically veterinary science can improve the husbandry and the care for those animals. I thought maybe the vet school are keeping these things for their own teaching collections. Or was he going to another museum collection outside the state, was suggested to me. Yes, other people with more reserves and more taxidermists who may be more capable of taking these sorts of things. So I asked the question. Worryingly, Dublin Zoo, the person I asked wasn't someone who personally looked after Saibu. I didn't do that, but I asked their scientific officer. And he wrote back and said, oh, I don't know what happens to them after they go for necropsy. And I was like, oh, God, I hope I haven't unearthed some sort of thing. So I was like, okay. Well, he said he'd find out. So I was like, oh, God, I hope everything's fine. He wrote back, and this is what happens to them. Yes. They all get incinerated immediately post necropsy. So it's really to do with biocontrol, like it's biohazards, like a lot of these things. They're necropsied, and then they don't need anything else from the animal, and they are incinerated, like any medical remains would be. So yeah, I did some reading about this. Someone did actually do a paper in Bioscience in 2022, talking about zoos and museums, and like historically, a lot of you will know that the case was that it was just down to personal kind of relationships between museum staff and zoo staff, or comparative anatomy teaching staff, who maybe knew each other, and they said, oh, do you know, like I'm doing this dissection of this thing tomorrow, do you want a bit of for the museum? It was a very casual thing. Historically, wasn't really a formal arrangement. So I set about trying to get something cool. So what I would say to anyone who's wondering about this is just ask the question. You don't know what they're doing, and they may not want everything. Even if they have plans for some of it, they may not want all of it. And a lot of us have really historic collections that are maybe a bit tired looking, or like that they're maybe not the most zoologically correct depiction of that animal. And you can, often they're quite open to donating things to the museum. You have to be really clear about expectations. Your expectations, in that you want to tell them you don't expect them to give you everything, like they may have plans for stuff. You need to be really clear about what you can do, how much you can take, and that you won't, you in all likelihood won't be able to take everything that passes away. You need to pre-plan. If you're planning on building this relationship before anything kind of comes to fruition, you need to already have a plan for how you're going to preserve this animal, because the zoos don't know in advance. It's like we bring your dog, unfortunately, to the vet, and you're told, oh, well, their quality of life isn't great, and they have to make the decision to put them down. The same thing happens in the zoo. So they don't get a huge amount of notice. It's a couple of days max, before an animal needs to be euthanized. So you need to have a plan. One thing you can do is you can get a freezer. If the animal is small enough to fit in the freezer, that's all you need, because later on you can send that or get a taxidermist to work on it. If you only want skeletal material, all you need is a preparator, because you don't need to freeze anything. You're not looking to keep the skin. So regardless of the size, you just bury the thing or dissect it and do the best you can. You don't need to preserve the tissue. If you want the skin of something that is too large to fit in a freezer, you need a preparator, because you need to skin it to make the skin small enough to fit in the freezer and be preserved until you can get it to a taxidermist. So that is what you need to do. You need to be ready to respond really quickly. You don't have a lot of notice. Like I said, it could be the next couple of days when you get the call. So you kind of need to be able to drop everything and go and get the thing. How do you get a preparator? Because we don't have one in our museum. You train yourself. That's literally how you do it. I mean, when I started this role, they just got back to 2005 staffing levels. So like 4 curators and 1 keeper for 2 million specimens, and no curatorial assistants either. So yeah, you have to build the skills. You can do a course. I did a lovely one in Naturalis in 2023, led by Becky Desjardins. You can ask your local taxidermist. You can contact museum colleagues who do have preparators or taxidermists in-house and ask them if they'd be willing to do skills sharing. And what actually happened that led up to this is Saibu died, emailed the zoo. They said he was getting incinerated. They investigated what they'd need to do to give him to us, because there are some logistics around, and obviously biocontrols. We got offered a hippo about 6 weeks after. And yeah, obviously it's just me. No, I'm really sorry. I can't do it. And they were obviously totally understanding. Like, they weren't expecting us to be able to take an entire adult male hippo. So I got offered, got a text in December 2024. This is Tundra, a female Amur tiger, who was resident at the zoo for a number of years, and they had to make the decision. So this slide has some images from the necropsy. If you would rather not see them, you can look away now, and you will know when I've passed that point. So on the Wednesday morning, I got a text from the zoo to say that they were probably going to have to make the decision in the coming days, because her quality of life wasn't great. She had a few medical conditions. I text Paolo, and Paolo, my boss, said, "Make it so." So literally, that was the entirety of the text. So I said, "Okay, great." So I wrote back to them. So they asked me. This is the first time they've successfully asked me to take anything. And they said, "Do you want any part of this?" And I wrote back and said, "Yes, I'd like all of the skin and all of the skeleton if I can." And they were like, "Oh, okay, how are we going to do this?" 2 days later, Friday, 8 a.m., poor Tundra was euthanized in her habitat. And her necropsy began straight away, 8:30. So they actually had to ask the team from the vet pathology lab to do the necropsy in the zoo in order for them to be able to give us her remains. Because once she went to the vet college to be necropsied for biohazard reasons, they weren't allowed to let her remains leave their site. So the zoo went to significant trouble to support this. Like, this is not something they normally do on site. Oh no. Oh, there we go. So it's not something they normally do on site. So yeah, it was great. We did it. This is her brain. They were able to tell that she had some encephalopathy from a previous kind of incident. And interestingly, the keeper said they were really glad that they were able to see this and see the evidence, because often they don't get to go and watch the necropsies, and that was actually really great for them to be able to see that they'd made the right decision in terms of her care. I took a load of measurements before I skinned her, with knowing that the taxidermist would need them in the future. I skinned her. This is me. I will say it was very messy because she was warm. Like, she had only just been put down. So it was very different to anything I've skinned previously that has been long dead or pre-frozen. So that's something to think about. I had to section her carcass to fit her into a chest freezer. So I had to skin her first, obviously, to keep her skin intact, and then section the carcass and put everything into the freezer in bits. I put her in the freezer, and then I had to have a shower in the vet surgery because it was the museum's Christmas party that day. And I was covered in blood. Yeah. That was exhausting. So yeah, you can do it. It can be done. It takes a long time. It took me a long time. I planned to prep out her to trim more flesh off her carcass initially. I didn't have time to do that in the day. And I'm actually glad I didn't, because a renowned taxidermist has since informed me that it is good to have some nice casts of the musculature on the face and the shoulders and so on. So it's actually a good thing that I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. It was very messy. You should ask for help. She was very heavy. She was 139 kilos, and like everyone just left when the necropsy was over. Everyone who worked in the zoo left. Everyone who worked for UCD pathology left, and I had to like flip her and turn her and do all that. So, yeah, heavy. You need something better than surgical scalpels. I broke a lot of scalpels. So yeah. We moved it to the freezer. I'm out of time. We're going to bury her carcass in this lovely tank full of elephant poo, and then we're going to get a taxidermist. 1 minute to talk about why. So these animals are really rare and charismatic animals. They have really detailed pedigrees and life histories. They have huge value in terms of their genetics to keep them in collections, but also the public have, close relationships with a lot of these kind of ambassadors of their species. A lot of historic collections are colonial in context. This is our Bengal tiger, which is the only taxidermy tiger we have, collected by King George V. And, it's posed in this very kind of cowering way. So even the style of the taxidermy isn't really depicting tigers in the best light. So it'd be nice to have some comparison in the gallery to talk about, the past and now and the changes. So yeah, and talk about the kind of research that goes on and the scientific use of the collections today. It's unethical not to preserve them. Okay, there's a wish list that I got from the zoo. They're not killed to order. This is Pierre. He's a lemur. I picked him up last week. They also are doing comms around it. And big thanks to the people in the zoo who made it happen. All of my colleagues in NMI who really supported and got me to the point of being able to have the confidence to say, yeah, I'll go and skin that tiger. And Becky Desjardins and the prep team at Naturalis. There's a reference. And thank you. Done.
Thank you, Emma. What a fantastic talk. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in the room, but I have one from online already. Emma, have you got any tips for talking to vets about managing necropsies? They do tend to rip them up, making taxidermy more difficult.
Yes. Yeah, so that was one thing they asked me. And I suppose it was useful that I was there on site when she was being necropsied, because I kind of just had the conversation with the UCD vets. Like they can make it neater than they would otherwise. Like they'll just make a neater incision, down the central line. And they did obviously want to take her brain out. So they actually removed the skin from her head to give them access so they could cut open the skull, but they did it in a nice, neat way. That will enable us basically to put the skull back together, and her skin wasn't damaged by that. So yeah, they're very they facilitated that really well. So yeah.
Anybody got any other questions for Emma?
I was wondering, what was the timeline between you having this idea and training yourself up and skinning your first animal?
Oh, well, I've always been a bit weird. So I've been training for this my whole life. What can I say? I like dead stuff. So but I wasn't even thinking of working curatorially when I did that course in Naturalis. It was something I saw, like I keep an eye out on training, and it was something I just was really interested in, and I got on it. And I'm really glad I did. Yeah, and I will say when I arrived in the zoo, I arrived in the zoo on the morning of doing the tiger, and the zoo vet was there, and he was Frank, and he was like, "Oh, so like, oh God, do you do an awful lot of this? Like, what's the biggest thing you've done before? And I was like, I like helped with a beaver. So, like, you just have to. It's if you can do a mouse, you can do a tiger. It's just bigger. It takes longer. It's the same thing. So, yeah, just have a bit of confidence and belief that you can do it. Yeah.
It was more of a comment than a just to say I am so super impressed because I very recently learnt how to do animal skinning from the lovely Jasmine Miles Long, who's in the room today. And the fact that you managed to skin that tiger in a day, when I think it took us to do these tiny birds, I'm just like absolutely in awe and super impressed. So well done.
It can be done.
Fascinating. Really, really lovely talk. Was there any cost implications? Because you said that the zoo you had to do the autopsy there or
Yeah, so none for any of the partners. Like, we obviously will have to pay to get her taxidermied and mounted. But no, obviously with CITES and everything, there is no trade. We don't trade, they don't trade. So yeah, everything. And UCD, obviously, they were just told, well, if you want to do the necropsy, you have to come to the zoo. So it wasn't their decision to make. So yeah. Yeah, so it was cool. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really interesting. My question is about CITES. You say there was no CITES, but I know that our museum has got CITES registration, and we recently helped National Museum in Scotland get material from Dublin, from Belfast Zoo, and there was a whole heap of CITES stuff involved. So I was wondering how you managed not to have CITES problems.
Well, we did get a cert, but I would say we're unique in that we don't charge in for any of our events, our museum. So we are a non-commercial entity. That may change in the future if we start monetizing anything, but at the moment we never charge for any of our events. So if you're not making money from the display of that animal, it doesn't CITES technically doesn't apply. We did end up getting a certificate for her, and the reason being is that we will likely have to send her abroad to be taxidermied because the knowledge and expertise doesn't really exist in Ireland. So for transport overseas, import export, we will need to have it. Yeah. You can ask me at tea. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Emma.